decisions to make this week, of course, with 3 SEC teams that were in the hunt losing over the weekend. Now, all of a sudden, and of course, Indiana losing as well in a big way, committee's got some decisions to make this, that we're going to see in this next ranking.
I think so. So it comes out tonight in like 3.5 hours. I'm looking forward to it. I think the biggest takeaway, the big beneficiaries of Ole Miss and Alabama losing, because they're done.
And A&M.
Right, and A&M. Although A&M's got a chance if they beat Texas this weekend.
There's a conversation to be had, yes.
Yeah, so I think with those teams losing, I think it clearly opens the door. We're going to get 2 ACC teams. And we have not been able to have that as a serious conversation until now. You see the way the committee has been rating the ACC by how high Miami and SMU have both been rated. For example, the AP, which just came out, has Miami and SMU 8 and 9 respectively. I think it's very clear now we are going to get 2. As long as Miami and SMU win this weekend, we're going to get 2 ACC teams in. The winner and the runner-up of the ACC championship are both going to get in.
Because they've made it abundantly clear that they're not going to hold the conference championship against any team that play, which you can't do. And I think SMU has warranted themselves. Their only losses to BYU, who is a ranked team.
They're impressive.
You cannot hold that against them. I completely agree. The big beneficiary, of course, Indiana, because they were in danger of falling out of, into that 13 range.
How far do you expect them to fall tonight? I think 8 or 9. I don't think they're going to drop that much.
They're going to get a road game. They're not getting a home game. They're not. They're going to stay.
Right, 9 would have them as a road
10.
game.
That 10 range makes a lot of sense for them.
Yeah.
That would be my guess. And but now all of a sudden the committee's going to have a decision here where if they have a couple more losses this week and maybe 1 or 2 more teams fall to 3 losses in the SEC play, how are you going to decide if any of them get in? Are you going to give leeway to one or the other? It's been a big round robin on who's beaten who and who has lost to who. There's not much of a decision-making process there. You're going to have teams like Alabama, Ole Miss, or if there's a team, it's Ole Miss because Ole Miss has that win over Georgia and they don't have a bad loss.
Well, yeah, so if something wacky happens this weekend, like if Indiana loses again this weekend, if Tennessee loses this weekend, that would wind up opening the door back up for a 3-loss Alabama team, right?
If one of those ACC team loses. So and now you're
right. If Miami loses this weekend, they would likely, as long as Clemson also wins, they would miss the ACC championship game altogether.
But they wouldn't benefit, I don't think, 2 ACC teams in that situation unless Clemson had a convincing win over South Carolina.
Yeah, right.
So let's put this.
No, Miami and SMU still need to win this weekend, for that scenario to be in play.
And I think they'll put them both in as long as it's not a lopsided win in that ACC.
If it's a competitive game in Charlotte, then they'll both get in.
At least it's fairly black and white in terms of what's going to happen there. Let's talk about, mushing up the colors a little bit. The Big 12. The Big 12 still has 9 teams that are still in capability in terms of all the help that they could possibly get with wins and losses in terms of who can get in. It's looking like it's going to be Iowa State, Arizona State.
Yes, right.
Colorado has an outside chance looking in, as does BYU. Needs some help on that sense. Arizona State, of course, going on the road, taking on Arizona. And, of course, Iowa State taking on Kansas State, which is not an easy game. Everybody likes to play spoiler. That's been the theme of the college football playoff the last few weeks, which is why you expand the playoff. Now, Arizona State, BYU meant something last week. That was an interesting game.
Can I just add, who are these idiots who before the season started thought that the 12-team playoff was not going to be a good
There might not be 12 teams that are good enough to win. We don't know who's going to win this year.
But the idea that it was going to take away from the regular season, it's made the regular season even more important.
Totally. And it made the conference championships. It's going to make that whole, a year ago, nobody really cared.
Right.
They could drop the conference championship game. It didn't make a difference.
Yeah.
Now, all of a sudden, automatic buy-it play, is somebody going to steal a bit? We'll see. But
it's so good like this. It really is. Now, I'm not on the side of people, you know what, we'll eventually expand it to 14. If you can't make it in with 12, you go sit in the corner and cry on your own. Like 12 this is a good number. But who didn't think that this was going to be a good year with the 12 teams?
And one thing I would put money on is if and when the SEC, the first 4 out has 2 or 3 SEC teams on it, whether that be Alabama, Ole Miss, A&M,
right?
They'll be the first in line at the NCAA headquarters to lobby for a 16 seed or 14 college football playoff.
I think right now, we're going to see tonight, I think Clemson is going to be the first team out tonight. I think they're going to be the first ones out.
Yeah, and they have a big game against South Carolina. They're sort of the odd man out here.
They totally lose that game, Clemson, and then we don't have to have this conversation anymore. They could totally lose.
They're the odd man out. They haven't played SMU or Miami. They don't necessarily have a path to get to that game. They lost to Louisville, which is a terrible loss.
Yep.
A team in which both Miami and SMU both beat. So that win right there will probably be the deciding factor on that. So they'll probably be the odd man out.
How high do you think Notre Dame is?
I think
I would have 4.
The key is they're going to get a home game. That's it. That I would lock that in.
Yes.
They're going to get a home game.
I would have them ahead of Penn State. It doesn't matter because they can't be top 4, but I would have.
The committee won't think like this, but in terms if you want to make this competitive, you don't want a couple blowouts in that first round, here's what you need to do.
Yeah, they're not supposed to think like that.
You need to have the cold weather teams get home games. That's what we should root for as college football fans.
Right now we're staring at 3 cold weather home games.
That Penn State should be a home game.
Yep.
Notre Dame should be a home game.
And Ohio State, as long as they don't win the Big Ten, Ohio State.
And if Ohio State doesn't win the Big Ten, you're looking at Ohio State getting a home game. Off of that alone, maybe Indiana surprises some people. You never know. But off of that alone, I think having those SEC teams that never, it's not like the NFL where Miami comes up once or twice a year, they have to play a cold weather game.
Right.
Those teams never play in cold weather games.
Right.
And that will be a big change.
Imagine Arizona State. They have to go to Notre Dame in the snow.
Absolutely.
Good luck.
And even teams like Tennessee or Alabama who are so used to playing in the domes or in the nice weather, that evens the playing field a little bit. We know they're out-talented. We know they're probably better teams in the SEC. But how do you level that a little bit?
It's so
Play
cool.
in the
That's
cold.
what I was thinking about the whole night on Thursday night last week when you had Pittsburgh and Cleveland, where it's like it's a blizzard, and we're going to get a game like this in the first round of the college football
Which
playoffs.
is what you need. It's how you make it a little bit, you add some feel to it, add some feel to the home field, and also level the playing field. So Notre Dame's probably going to get a home game. Penn State's probably going to get a home game. I would assume Ohio State's going to get a home game.
Unless they win the Big Ten.
Unless they win the Big Ten, of course. And that, other team is probably going to be a middle-of-the-pack SEC.
Mm-hmm.
So Texas is going to get it by. I'm going to assume they're going to slot Georgia in to get that other home game.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So that is what we're looking at. So now in terms of the matchups, I know they're saying they don't favor reseeding in terms of playing.
Are you interested in the idea of teams, and we could see this Ohio State, Oregon, of teams playing 3 times this year?
I don't love that.
That's possible. And same thing, it's also possible, Georgia, Texas. We could get 3 times this year.
Don't love that. Don't love that, but you can't do anything about that. If you're not going to root for a Georgia-Texas final if they're on opposite sides of the bracket. They meet each other earlier than that, not the biggest deal in the world. You're going to want to see 2 teams that necessarily haven't played, whether that be a Big Ten versus the SEC.
It's always weird if you have one of those teams that's 2-0, and then the team gets their first win in the national championship. You beat them 1 out of 3 times, and you're the national champion.
Now, do you see the advantageous nature of not necessarily getting to the conference championship game, but you're almost slotted in to get a spot? The Penn States of the world
hosting a game.
They're going to be able to host a playoff game. They don't have to play next week.
Yeah.
And they're going to get a home game out of this, and they get that home field revenue, number one. So there's a monetary aspect to it.
I think very secretly you have some
athletic
athletic departments who are like, you know what, missing out on the conference championship game, getting that home game, not the worst thing.
I thought this would be the case with the SEC coming into the year, but it's actually the case with the Big Ten. Penn State is the beneficiary of this because they don't have to play next week. They don't have to deal with an Ohio State and Oregon. They get to go into an early rest and prepare for a home game against a likely very lesser opponent, the 10, 11, 12 seed, which is going to be the Arizona States of the world. Whether Boise State gets that 4 or that 10 or 11 remains to be seen.
And think about it. For a team going to Penn State, it's going to be a lesser team, A, but also B, terrible weather, C, it's a disaster getting to Penn State.
Yeah.
So you got one of these teams that are traveling very far to get there. You get to the airport, we're still talking like a 2-hour drive. Penn State's a very difficult campus to get to.
Very difficult, very difficult. Of course, that's Jonathan Zas, Colin Russo here on ESPN 106.3. We'll see what happens tonight in terms of the college football playoff ranking. It seems like the 12 is pretty set in stone. It's a matter of where everything is. Where do they put the Notre Dame? Is Indiana going to be a fringe candidate, or are they sitting there at 10-11? How big of that loss matters to the committee? They're still only got 1 loss here.
And are both ACC teams top 10?
And are both ACC teams. Usually it follows the AP relatively. And more importantly, what are they going to do with Boise State if a Arizona State, who has had pretty convincing wins the last couple weeks, has a convincing win this week against Arizona and then wins the Big 12 championship over Iowa State in convincing fashion? Do they leapfrog Boise State?
How mad were TV execs when Colorado lost last week? That's a disaster.
They wanted that.
Nobody cares about Arizona State, Iowa State, Big 12.
And nobody wanted Colorado I mean, that team was a joke. Kansas ran it all over them all game
Kansas
long.
playing very well. 3 straight wins against ranked teams.
And
That's not a bad team.
And they have Baylor this week, too. They're fighting for bowl spots. That's a game I like. Kansas still -1 on the road at Baylor this week. I think they want that bowl game. And that's a team that won 9 games last year. Underrated team in Kansas. You're completely right there. We'll continue the conversation.